The steam rose off the river in thick, gray curtains. As the boat scraped against the mud, Colonel Bryden stepped onto the bank, his boots sinking into the saturated earth. Kitty followed, shielding her eyes from the glare, while Dr. Plumford hauled the last of the crates onto the landing. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on every breath. Nathu stood nearby, keeping a firm grip on young Mowgli's hand as they watched the jungle wall rise before them. It was not a forest. It was a fortress of tangled vines and shadow. 50 yards away, the tall grass rippled. There was no wind, yet the stalks parted in a rhythmic, deliberate wave. Within the dark gap, two eyes caught the fading sunlight, glowing with a steady, golden intensity. Shere Khan lay low, his muscles coiled beneath his hide. His tail twitched once, a slow, silent movement that stirred the dust. He watched the newcomers unpack their supplies, tracking their every motion. The jungle was no longer silent. Every bird had ceased its call. The newcomers were being measured, and the predator had already decided the cost of their intrusion. The crack of a rifle shattered the stillness. A second shot followed, then a third, echoing deep into the canopy. A herd of deer exploded from the brush, hooves hammering the earth like falling stones. The jungle floor became a blur of frantic movement. Nathu jerked his hand, trying to pull Mowgli toward the safety of a nearby trunk, but the sheer force of the stampede slammed into them. Mowgli was knocked loose, sent spinning into the wall of dense, thorny thicket. He tumbled through the vines, the world turning into a kaleidoscope of green and shadow. Nathu lunged forward, his boots sliding in the churned mud. "Mowgli," he shouted, his voice cracking, but the roar of the panic drowned him out. He pushed into the thicket, slashing at the leaves with his bare hands, frantically calling the name again and again. Nothing answered. The deer had long since vanished into the dark, and the jungle had closed its ranks. Nathu stood alone in the center of the path, chest heaving, listening to the drip of dew from the leaves. The rustle of a single branch faded into the distance. Mowgli was gone. Seasons bled into one another. The boy who once clung to a guide's hand vanished, replaced by a creature that moved like smoke through the canopy. He watched the wolves, mirroring the low crouch of the hunt and the precise, rhythmic gait of the pack. Under the guidance of the bear, he learned the language of the forest floor. He knew which leaves held water and which roots would stop a fever. His skin toughened, marked by the jagged white lines of thorns and branches that had tested his resolve. He did not run, he flowed. He moved with a silent, predatory speed that left no trail for others to follow. His eyes, once soft and wide, narrowed to a hawk's focus, constantly scanning the shadows for movement or threat. He learned the timing of the jungle, the exact pulse of the midday heat and the cold descent of the night. He slept in the high branches, limbs tangled in vines, breathing in the damp earth. He was no longer a stranger to the wild. He was a part of its heartbeat. When the jungle breathed, he breathed with it. He was the ghost in the leaves, a survivor forged in the relentless, unforgiving rhythm of the deep green dark. The river outpost had grown. Stone walls replaced the temporary shelters, and the constant thrum of industry now competed with the chorus of the insects. A boat pulled into the muddy bank, and Kitty stepped onto the wooden pier. She did not look at the soldiers unloading crates or the sprawling perimeter fence. Her gaze drifted past the encampment, fixing on the dense, impenetrable wall of green trees that stretched toward the horizon. She moved with a measured, deliberate pace, ignoring the greetings of the officers as she made her way to the main veranda. Once inside the quiet shade, she reached into a small leather pouch. Her fingers closed around a piece of carved wood. It was a wolf, roughly hewn but unmistakable, its surface worn smooth by years of touch. She turned it over and over, the grain catching the golden light of the setting sun. A heavy, lingering stillness settled over her. She did not see the outpost or the path back to the river. She saw only the shadow of a boy she had lost to the trees long ago. The carving was cold in her palm, yet she held it tight, pressing her thumb into the etched fur, as if the wood might pulse with the heartbeat of the forest she refused to forget. The heavy silence of the veranda shattered under the sharp, rhythmic strike of boots against wood. Captain William Boon emerged from the shadows of the doorway. Every movement was calculated, precise, and devoid of the chaotic grace Kitty had been contemplating. He stopped directly behind her, the metallic tang of his sidearm catching the light. He did not speak at first, letting the weight of his presence fill the space. Then, he reached out. His hand descended, firm and heavy, settling squarely on her shoulder. The contact was deliberate, a claim of ownership that cut through the air like a blade. Kitty stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the wooden wolf, her knuckles turning white as she pressed the carving deep into her palm. She shifted her weight, moving just enough to break the connection, her breath hitching in the sudden, suffocating closeness. Boone did not recoil. He remained, a solid, unyielding barrier that turned the open air of the veranda into a cage. He surveyed the perimeter with cold, narrow eyes, his posture signaling a total disregard for the forest beyond. He was the architect of this new order, and for Kitty, he was the wall that kept the wild in her memories strictly contained. The midday heat was absolute when the shouting started. It surged from the main gate, a frantic, discordant chorus that drew soldiers away from their posts. A group of villagers pushed through the perimeter, their faces flushed with exertion and fear. They dragged something between them, a tangle of limbs and shadows bound by heavy iron chains. The prisoner fought with every ounce of his strength. His body coiled and snapping like a trapped predator. He slammed his heels into the dirt, carving deep furrows into the ground as the villagers hauled him forward. Dust rose in a thick, choking cloud, obscuring the scene until they reached the center of the courtyard. The soldiers leveled their rifles, the sharp click of hammers pulling back echoing against the stone walls. The prisoner stopped struggling, his chest heaving, his gaze darting between the men, the structures, and the encroaching silence. He stood defiant, a creature of raw muscle and unrefined instinct, pinned in the middle of a world that viewed him as a threat. The air in the compound grew thin and cold. The villagers stepped back, leaving the man alone in the center of the square, surrounded by the cold, unyielding geometry of the outpost. Kitty pushed through the gathering crowd. The soldiers blocked her path, but she didn't stop. Her gaze locked on the man in the center of the yard. He was covered in the grit of the forest, his breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. As she stepped into the circle, the man shifted. His head snapped toward her. In that instant, the frantic energy of the courtyard vanished. She saw it, the spark. It was not the hollow stare of a captive, but the sharp, piercing recognition of someone who had once known the open sky. She moved forward, placing herself between the prisoner and the rifles leveled at his chest. Her hands went up, palms open, a clear barrier against the soldiers. "Stop," she commanded, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The soldiers hesitated, their boots scraping against the hard-packed earth as they lowered their aim. The man did not look away. He stood rooted, his eyes searching hers, mirroring the flicker of memory. For a heartbeat, the outpost, the iron chains, and the cold discipline of the guards ceased to exist. There was only the weight of the past, surfacing in the middle of a world that refused to understand what it had caught. Days bled into weeks within the confines of the outpost. Mowgli sat at a heavy wooden desk, his body coiled and tense. Before him lay an open book, its pages filled with ink marks that held no meaning to him. He reached out, his calloused fingers tracing the stiff paper, pressing down with enough force to nearly tear the surface. He shifted his weight, his muscles rippling, but the wooden chair groaned and splintered under his restless energy. He stood abruptly, the chair clattering to the floor. He paced the small room, his stride long and silent, his shadow stretching across the whitewashed walls. He stopped at the window, the frame biting into his palms as he gripped the ledge. Outside, the jungle canopy rippled in the breeze, a vibrant, shifting green that called to him. He looked down at his hands, marked by years of climbing and hunting, now stained with ink from the book. He struck the desk, the sound sharp and final. The silence of the room felt heavier than the deepest forest night. He did not belong to the paper or the ink, and every minute spent within these walls was a battle against his own instincts. The rumors arrived like a fever. Soldiers huddled in the corners of the courtyard, their voices low, eyes bright with sudden, sharp ambition. They spoke of Monkey City of gold stacked in piles, jewels that caught the light like trapped stars, and statues carved from solid jade buried in the deep green. The air in the outpost thickened with the scent of avarice. Mowgli stood near the edge of the barracks, his ears catching the greed in every word. Then the gate creaked. Captain William Boon walked into the center of the camp, his boots striking the earth with a rhythmic, heavy thud that silenced the whispers. He did not look at the men. He looked toward the horizon where the jungle canopy hid its secrets. He stopped near the desk where the maps were spread, his shadow falling over the ink-stained parchment. His fingers moved to his side, hooking firmly over the polished hilt of his sword. The metal clicked against the scabbard, a sound that cut through the humid air like a blade. He stood there, motionless, his gaze fixed on the dense wall of trees. Every muscle in his frame was taut, not with the vigilance of a protector, but with the focused, hungry stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Boon stepped closer, his presence crowding the small space. He pointed a gloved finger at the map, his eyes hardening into flint. "You know where it is?" he demanded, his voice low and vibrating with cold authority. "Take us to the ruins. The gold is wasted on the vines." Mowgli did not flinch. He stood perfectly still, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, his gaze locking onto Boon without a flicker of hesitation. The air between them grew thin, charged with the static of an impending storm. "Only those who follow the law of the jungle may enter," Mowgli replied, his voice steady and devoid of fear. The words were a wall. Boon's hand tightened on his sword hilt, the metal groaning under his grip. He leaned in, his face inches from Mowgli's. Attempting to force submission through sheer proximity, Mowgli didn't retreat. He simply widened his stance, his eyes reflecting the relentless indifference of the forest itself. He knew the cost of greed, and he refused to be the one to pay it. The silence stretched, brittle, and dangerous. Boon realized then that he could break the man's body, but he could not bend his spirit to serve the hunger of men. The announcement came during the evening meal, cutting through the humid air of the veranda. Colonel Bryden stood, his glass raised, his voice carrying clearly across the compound. He spoke of alliances, of stability, and finally, of the engagement between Kitty and Captain Boon. Mowgli was sitting at the edge of the table, his fingers tracing the rigid lines of an open book. At the sound of the words, his hand froze. The book slipped from his grasp, hitting the wooden floor with a sharp, hollow thud that went unnoticed by the others. He looked up, his eyes darting toward Kitty, but she remained focused on her father. The reality of the choice settled into his lungs, heavy and cold. He stood, knocking his chair backward. No one stopped him. He moved with a sudden, fluid grace, stepping off the veranda and into the shadow of the trees. The light of the lanterns faded behind him, replaced by the deep, rhythmic pulse of the jungle. He did not look back. He pushed through the thicket, the branches snapping against his skin, and vanished into the darkness. The path he had tried to walk was gone, and the wild was waiting to take him back. The news did not come as a shout, but as a vibration through the earth. A village scout stumbled into the thicket, gasping out the words. Bandits had taken her. Mowgli stopped mid-stride. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath. He crouched, his palms flat against the damp soil, and closed his eyes. The scent of the outpost was gone, replaced by the bitter, metallic tang of fear and the bruised leaves of a forced passage. He surged forward, not running like a man, but flowing like water over stone. Every broken twig was a signpost, every crushed blade of grass a confession of the path taken. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion, muscles coiled and ready, his breath hitched into a rhythmic, silent cadence. He wasn't searching, he was hunting. The confusion of his earlier retreat had vanished, replaced by a cold, singular focus. He caught the scent of horse sweat and stale tobacco mixing with the humid air. It was a trail carved in desperation. He accelerated, his eyes scanning the canopy for broken branches. The jungle was no longer a refuge, it was a weapon, and he was its blade, closing the distance with every silent, ground-devouring step. The trail changed. The frantic, erratic scuffing of bandit boots gave way to the deliberate, heavy tread of military-issue soles. Mowgli slowed, his body pressing into the shadow of a massive fern. He crept forward, his ears straining against the humid hum of the jungle. Ahead, the path opened into a clearing. He saw them, not the bandits, but Boon and his men, standing with their weapons slung low, watching as a group of scavengers dragged a bound figure behind a heavy curtain of vines. There was no struggle, no pursuit. The soldiers were waiting, checking their watches and adjusting their gear with cold efficiency. Mowgli gripped the trunk of a tree, his knuckles white. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. The kidnappers were not enemies of the captain. They were his tools. Boon had manufactured the crisis to force a path to the ruins, using the girl as a key to unlock the city's gates. The betrayal was absolute. Mowgli watched Boon bark a signal, the men moving forward with the precision of a hunting party that already knew where the kill was hidden. The jungle seemed to recoil from the calculated malice of the men. Mowgli felt the cold iron of his own resolve tighten. He was no longer just tracking a victim. He was stalking a predator. The vines parted, revealing the jagged stone maw of Monkey City. It was not a place of worship, but a graveyard of ambition. As the men stepped into the central plaza, the air grew thick with the scent of stagnant dust and ancient metal. Boon signaled a halt, but the command died in his throat. The soldiers had seen the glinting piles of gold statues and scattered coins that carpeted the floor. Discipline shattered. They broke ranks, scrambling over the crumbling pillars like starving animals. Boots kicked through priceless relics to reach the heavier bars of bullion. Rings of gold clattered against stone, a hollow, frantic music that echoed through the amphitheater. Boon did not stop them. He watched with a hungry stillness, his hands twitching at his sides. Mowgli stood at the edge of the shadows, watching the frenzy. He saw the way the men ignored the structural groans of the temple walls, obsessed only with the weight of the metal in their palms. The jungle itself seemed to sense the intrusion. The wind died completely. The birds stopped their calls. A heavy, suffocating pressure built in the center of the ruins, a silent warning that the earth was beginning to tire of its guests. The greed was absolute, and the city was waiting. A roar ripped through the plaza, a sound so deep it vibrated the marrow in the men's bones. The stone pillars trembled, shedding clouds of ancient dust. Shere Khan stepped from the darkness, his presence turning the air frigid. The soldiers froze. Gold coins spilled from their trembling fingers, clattering like bone on the temple floor. The greed that had driven them seconds ago vanished, replaced by the raw, wide-eyed clarity of prey. Boon dropped his sack, his hand darting toward his holster, but his movements were sluggish, paralyzed by the sheer scale of the threat. Mowgli did not move. He stood anchored to the crumbling masonry, his breathing rhythmic and shallow, his eyes locked onto the predator. The jungle began to reclaim its own. Vines that had been dormant for centuries pulsed with sudden, aggressive life, tightening around the archways. The ceiling groaned, a sound of stone grinding against stone as the temple roof began to sag. Panic erupted as the men turned to run, but the path was already closing. The tiger paced, his tail flicking with a hypnotic, dangerous grace. He was not hunting gold. He was hunting the intruders. Mowgli watched the tiger, waiting for the exact moment the temple would give way. The sky vanished behind a curtain of falling stone. The temple roof gave way in a thunderous crash, forcing the survivors into a claustrophobic cage of debris. Boon scrambled over a fallen pillar, pistol leveled at the shadows. He searched for a target, his breathing jagged and loud. Mowgli did not rely on sight alone. He moved through the falling dust like smoke, his feet finding purchase on the shifting rubble. Boon fired, but the shot went wide, striking a support beam and sending a shower of splinters into the air. Before he could reset his aim, Mowgli lunged. It was a blur of movement, calculated and absolute. He hit Boon with the force of a falling branch, knocking the weapon from his grip. It skidded across the uneven stone and disappeared into a dark crevice. Boon lunged back, swinging his fists, but he fought with the clumsy desperation of a man who relied on tools, not instinct. Mowgli ducked under a wild blow, gripped Boon by the arms, and twisted with a fluid, predatory grace. He forced the man back against a crumbling wall, pinning his shoulders with a grip that left no room for escape. The law of the jungle had no mercy for the weak of spirit. Boon fell to his knees as the floor beneath them groaned, the entire structure tilting toward the abyss. The final tremor shook the earth until the last pillar groaned and fell silent. Dust billowed out from the ruins, thick and gray, swallowing the remaining light of the moon. Mowgli pulled himself from the wreckage, his lungs burning as he cleared the debris. He stood amidst the jagged stone, chest heaving, his gaze locked on the clearing ahead. Shere Khan emerged from the swirling haze. He did not growl. He did not show his teeth. He moved with a heavy, deliberate pace, his claws sinking into the soft mud. The tiger stopped just feet away, the heat of his breath visible in the cooling air. He sniffed the silence, his golden eyes scanning the fallen walls and the broken men. The jungle held its breath. Every leaf remained still. The predator lowered his massive head, his forehead touching the earth in a slow, calculated arc. It was not a gesture of defeat, but of recognition. The law of the forest had been upheld by the one who lived by its code. Mowgli held his position, his hands steady, his posture unyielding. The tiger turned, his tail trailing through the dust, and vanished back into the shadows of the trees. The threat had passed, leaving behind only the wreckage of human greed and the quiet, absolute authority of the wild. Kitty stood at the edge of the clearing. The path back to the river lay open, the boat waiting in the distance. She looked at the water, then turned her back on it. She looked at Mowgli. He waited by the wall of trees, his hand outstretched. She walked toward him, her boots crunching on dry leaves. She reached out, took his hand, and felt the firm grip of a life lived in the open. Together, they turned away from the ruins and stepped into the dense, green canopy. The forest swallowed their shadows as they walked deeper into the wild, leaving the world of men behind.